They left a Doberman puppy to die in the woods, but what followed changed everything. I never thought humans could be that cruel. But
Don't
that
worry, I'm here
morning,
to help
deep
you.
in the silent pines
You're
outside
gonna be okay.
Flagstaff, I saw something that made me lose faith in my own kind. A Doberman puppy, barely 2 months old, was tied to a tree. Its neck and belly were bound with
You're
old
safe
nylon
now.
rope cinched so tight its skin
right.
was bruised black and blue, its stomach swollen, distended beyond what nature ever intended. It could barely stand, its legs trembling, each breath a rasping fight for air, its throat wheezing as if even survival had to be earned. Beneath its paws lay a crumpled note scrawled in marker. "He won't make it through the week." I froze. The forest was bright, but inside me only darkness. Not the darkness of the woods, but of humanity itself. Someone had tied a living creature to a tree, written its death sentence, and walked away as if tossing trash. No remorse. No conscience. I've seen men die in my arms in war. I've dragged friends out of burning trucks. But never, not once, have I felt such raw disgust, not for death but for indifference. This wasn't savagery. This was moral decay, the kind that hides behind quiet hands and empty eyes. I stepped closer. The puppy looked at me, eyes hollow dry as if it had cried until there was nothing left. No fear, no hope. Just a weary surrender, like it had already accepted that no one was coming. I knelt. The ground burned against my knees. My fingers touched the rope skin, slick, warm, alive, but fading. I could feel the faint heartbeat fluttering beneath torn flesh. I pulled my folding knife and cut through each loop. Every snap of the rope released a bead of blood. It didn't cry, just breathed in ragged, wheezing bursts, eyes fixed on me as if asking, "Are you really any different from them?" When the last strand fell, the body in my arms felt frighteningly light, all bones and skin. My hand brushed its belly, hard, swollen, burning, not from fullness from infection. Something inside was rotting. I'd seen it before in field med tents, abscess, rupture, poison spreading under the skin. A silent killer that would have taken it within hours. I knew that truth instantly. If I walked away now, it would die. Slowly, in agony, forgotten, I pulled it close to my chest, feeling each shallow breath warm my shirt. "No kid," I whispered, "not while I'm still standing." I don't know if it heard me, but I ran anyway through brush and dirt and disbelief. My hands shook. My mind spun with rage. Who could do this? Who could write that note and still sleep at night? Did they hear its cries? Did they see those eyes? Or had they already traded their hearts for silence? I once thought war showed me the worst of mankind. I was wrong. It's peace that frightens me more, because here cruelty wears a smile and walks away. In war, you at least know who your enemy is. Here, they just don't care. I ran out of that forest holding the puppy like I was running from despair itself. It didn't fight, didn't bark, just rested its head on my shoulder. And in that silence I heard it, the faint, stubborn rhythm of life syncing with my heartbeat. Weak, rapid, but still there. That morning I thought I was saving a dog from death. I didn't know it was saving what little humanity I had left. I still don't know why our paths crossed or what fate had in mind for us. All I know is this: that morning, in that breathless forest, I touched the edge between cruelty and hope. And for the first time in years, I chose to stand with life. I drove my old pickup through the forest like a man running from himself. The smell of blood and dust mixed with sweat clung to the air inside the cab. The little Doberman lay curled in my faded denim jacket, its head resting in the crook of my arm, its breathing as thin as thread. Each breath made my chest tighten. Each fragile gasp felt like someone was squeezing my heart bare-handed. My name's Jack Turner, 61 years old, a former paramedic with Arizona's Emergency Medical Corps. I've spent my life watching people die in my hands. After a while, you learn to shut your emotions off because if you don't, the grief will eat you alive. But this morning, what I held in my arms wasn't another rescue. It was a test to see if there was still any humanity left inside me that hadn't already died along the way. I live alone on the outskirts of Flagstaff, tucked between the slopes of the San Francisco Range. A small wooden cabin with a tilted roof wrapped in the constant scent of pine and dry wind. My wife Laura passed 3 years ago cancer. After the funeral, I packed away everything except her reading chair, the one she sat in every evening under the soft light of the lamp. Since then, the house has been filled only with the sound of wind whispering through the cracks, so quiet I could hear the blood moving through my own veins. Every morning, I still walk the same dirt trail, the one Laura once called the path of hope. But I stopped believing in that word long ago, because the day she left, the part of me that could hope left with her. Until this morning. I looked down at the tiny body in my arms, belly hard, breathing weak, but eyes still open, still searching mine as if asking, "Do you still believe in good things?" I had no answer, only the certainty that if I left it there to die, I'd be no different from the monsters who tied it up. The road to town stretched nearly 12 miles. Dust rose behind the truck like red smoke. Heat built inside the cab, the temperature gauge trembling, and all I could hear were two sounds, the steady rumble of the engine and that fragile rhythm of breath. I counted each one as if every exhale was another second borrowed for both of us. Back in my days with the course, I served alongside someone, Dr. Sarah McLean, a veterinarian who now runs a small clinic downtown. She was the kind of woman who could stitch a heartbeat back from ashes. If anyone in this world could save this puppy, it was Sarah. I pressed harder on the gas. The road bucked and rattled beneath the tires. My left hand gripped the wheel. My right stayed on the denim bundle, feeling the faint pulse flutter like a bird against my palm. Sometimes it stopped for seconds that felt like years, then started again. I nearly forgot to breathe each time. "Hang on, kid," I muttered, maybe for it, maybe for myself. "I've lost too much already. Don't make me lose you too." The clinic appeared at the end of the dirt road, a faded wooden sign, McLean Veterinary Clinic. The door trembled in the wind, a small bell chiming as I pushed it open. The smell of antiseptic hit me sharp and clean, the same scent that used to fill field tents when I stitched up soldiers by flashlight. Sarah looked up. Her eyes flicked from me to the creature in my arms. She didn't ask a thing, didn't waste a word, just nodded once firm, "Put him on the table." Now. I laid the puppy on the cold steel surface. Its body quivered, belly distended, the skin around the old rope burns puckered and dry. Sarah placed her hand over its chest, brow furrowing. "There's a mass here, maybe sepsis. He's critical, Jack." I kept my hand on its head. "I know, but I can't walk away again, not after what I saw." She met my eyes for a moment, 1 second, 2, then gave a single nod. "All right, I'll try." In that instant, I understood there are choices you make even when you know you might lose, because not choosing would kill something inside you far worse than failure ever could. I didn't know if I was saving a dog or saving myself from the hollow pit I'd been living in for 3 long years. Outside, the Arizona sun kept burning like fire. But inside that small clinic, a quiet battle had begun between life and death and the last fragments of who I used to be. The clinic fell into that strange silence only battlefields know. No words. Just the hiss of the ventilator, the scrape of a scalpel against steel, and the heavy pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. Sarah McLean pulled on her gloves and motioned for me to step back. "Jack, I need to open the abdomen now. If I wait, the infection will rupture." I nodded, wordless. I'd seen this kind of scene too many times before, but this time was different. This time, I wasn't saving a nameless patient. I was staring at the last flicker of humanity I thought I'd already buried. The Doberman puppy, whose name I didn't yet know was Raven, lay motionless on the steel table. The surgical light glared down on its swollen belly skin, tight and pulsing weakly. Sarah injected the anesthesia, the needle trembling slightly in her hand, her voice low and taut. "Pray he can handle the sedative." I pressed against the wall. My head spun. Then came the sound flesh being cut open. Soft, precise, but to me it was the sound of old ghosts tearing through the years. I was back in desert tents where blood mixed with dust and men screamed through morphine. Now, under that same sterile light, cold and merciless, I watched another war unfold, this one smaller, but no less sacred. Sarah whispered, "There's a mass. It's large." Her voice stayed calm, but her hands trembled ever so slightly. The infection's deep liver tissues breaking down pressure against the heart. A few more hours and he would have... She didn't finish. Only the fading beep, beep, beep from the monitor filled the air. I moved closer and placed my hand on his head. "Don't you quit on me, you hear I'm right here." I didn't know if he could hear, but I meant every word. Blood soaked through the gauze. Sarah's jaw clenched. Her eyes never left the wound. A drop of sweat rolled down her arm, landing on her gloved hand, mingling with the blood with the fight. In that moment, there were only 2 heartbeats in the room, hers and his. Mine simply beat for both of them. Outside, the sun still blazed. The light came through the frosted glass, striking Sarah's hands red, trembling sacred. It was brutal and holy all at once. A tiny life lay balanced between life and death, and 2 weary humans, a doctor and an old man, were doing everything they could to pull it back from the edge. Then Sarah exhaled sharply, found it. The abscess is deeper than I thought. She reached for the suction tube. The sound came soft but final shk. The air filled with the metallic tang of blood disinfectant and something else, hope ripped raw out of despair. She stitched fast every black thread, neat and deliberate, like someone sewing a soul back into place. When the last piece of gauze was set, Sarah looked up, her blue eyes exhausted but burning. "Infection's cleared. I've done everything I can. The rest is up to him." I looked down. His belly rose and fell weakly, lashes damp with sweat, body trembling. I laid my shaking hand across his forehead. "You hear me, kid. The fight's not over yet." Sarah peeled off her gloves and sank into a chair, chest heaving. "I don't know if he'll make it, Jack. But at least he won't have to die out there alone." I froze. That line hit me like a slow bullet. He won't have to die alone. Maybe that was the point of it all. Not victory, not survival, just not dying unseen. To have someone beside you who still believes you're worth saving. I stepped out of the operating room and sat on the old wooden chair in the hallway. Inside, the monitor kept its steady rhythm. Beep. 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 Each sound was a heartbeat. I counted like prayer. I looked at my hands, stained, trembling, but warm. For 3 years they hadn't touched another living soul. They hadn't held, saved, or loved anything. But today, they had touched life again. I lifted my head. Sunlight filtered through the cloudy window, painting a golden stripe across the white wall. And in that narrow band of light, I understood. Whether that little dog survived or not, I would never again be the man who stood by and watched. Never again. The recovery room was small, sterile, and cold. The kind of cold that didn't come from temperature but from silence. White light poured straight down onto the steel table, harsh and unblinking. The air still smelled of disinfectant and dried sweat. On the table, the little Doberman lay motionless, a thin blanket covering half its body. Black stitches tracing a line across its belly, bandages wrapped around its narrow hips. Beside it, the monitor blinked faintly, the soft beep, beep, echoing like a lonely heartbeat lost between worlds. I dragged a cracked plastic chair closer and sat down, my hand finding its head. Its fur was damp and cold, slick like something just pulled out of the rain. "It's over now, kid. The worst is done," I whispered, though I wasn't sure it could hear. I stayed there for hours, eyes fixed on the shifting numbers on the screen. I didn't know if I was guarding its life or keeping watch over whatever faith I had left in mine. Sometimes, after too many years of loss, you stop believing in miracles until something small and fragile starts breathing again under your hand. That night, Sarah walked in, mask-off eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "The abscess is cleaned out," she said softly, "but he's weak. If he makes it through the night, his odds improve." I nodded my gaze, never leaving that shallow rise and fall. I've seen worse make it. I muttered a lie I wanted to believe. Sarah touched my shoulder. "Jack, you can't stay here all night." "I'm not leaving," I said. My voice came out cracked but certain. When the door closed behind her, I poured a little warm water and stirred the thin broth they kept in the break room. Chicken stock, clear and faintly sweet. I carried it to the table, scooped a spoonful, and held it near his muzzle. No reaction. Just the whisper of steady, fragile breathing. I tried again, my voice breaking into a plea. "If you can hear me, give me something. Anything." Seconds passed. Then I saw it, the smallest miracle I'd ever witnessed. The tiny nose twitched. A shuddering breath. And then a pale pink tongue brushed the edge of the spoon, slow, weak, but alive with will. My throat closed. Tears came, not loud or messy, the kind that burn quietly deep in your chest. In that instant, I knew he wanted to live. Sarah reappeared at the doorway, watching in silence. A tired smile broke across her face. "You just did what medicine couldn't." I couldn't answer. My hand was shaking too much to lift another spoonful. Morning light seeped through the frosted window gray, giving way to gold. I was still there. Hadn't moved an inch. And I saw it, a flicker of movement. One paw twitched. The tail quivered. I laughed, a sound dry and rough, but real for the first time in years. "Good morning, little warrior," I said. Sarah joined me, clipboard in hand, voice gentler now. "If he keeps improving, he might eat on his own in a few days." I looked from her to him. "Then he deserves a name," I said. "Raven." "Raven," she echoed, puzzled. "Because he survived the storm, like the black bird people think can't outfly the thunder but always does." She smiled faintly. "That's a good name." The days blurred after that. I came every morning, coffee in one hand, Laura's old book in the other. The river between stars. I'd sit beside his crate and read aloud, voice hoarse from sleepless nights. Raven would lie there, head tilted slightly, eyes closed as if listening. Maybe he didn't understand the words, but he felt them, and so did I. On the 5th day, he opened his eyes fully, met mine with a gaze clear and steady, no longer hollow, no longer afraid. When I reached out my hand, he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned in, pressing his head gently into my palm. The warmth that met my skin was faint, but real. Sarah watched from the glass window, a quiet smile spreading. "You're his anchor, Jack," she said softly. I stroked the fur behind his ear, my voice barely above a breath. "No," I whispered, "he's mine." That was the first morning the sunlight over Flagstaff didn't burn. It was just warm enough to melt a little of the ice I'd been carrying for 3 long years. And in that fragile breath between us, I finally understood I had saved a small life, and that small life was saving what was left of me. I started calling him Raven on the 7th day. The name came naturally, no thought, no choice, just truth. Because when the light hit that dark brown coat under the lamp, I saw a small black bird trying to fly through a storm, and like that bird he had survived even when no one believed he could. 3 weeks after the surgery, Raven was strong enough to leave the clinic. Sarah removed the last bandage, smiling tired but warm. "He's still weak," she said, "but I think he's ready for the world out there." I nodded, heart beating softly, the first spark of anticipation I'd felt in years. The problem was my world out there was just a cramped third-floor apartment with narrow stairs and no yard. No place for a creature who had just fought his way back to life. So I went looking for a new home. A small cabin on the outskirts of Flagstaff near the same forest trail Laura and I once walked. Peeling paint-tilted roof knee-high grass, but it had a fenced sunlight and enough space for Raven to run. I signed the lease that same day, emptied the last of my savings, and didn't feel like I'd lost anything. I felt like I was buying back something I'd forgotten how to own faith. When moving day came, Raven stood at the open door staring at the pale gold yard under the afternoon sun. I opened the wooden door wide and whispered, "Go on, kid. This is your world now." At first, he moved cautiously, sniffing the grass, ears up, tail low. Then suddenly he ran, quick, clean, like a spark tearing through sunlight. With every circle, he made his tail wagged harder, his breath steadier. I sat on the porch, eyes blurring maybe from the sun, from tears I couldn't tell. I just saw that image, and in it I could almost hear Laura's voice. "See, there are still things worth loving." In the days that followed, Raven learned the rhythm of life again. Each morning, he waited by the door, nose nudging my sleeve as I pulled on my jacket. We walked the trail together, slow, quiet, in sync. His paws pressed softly into the dirt, matching the sigh of the wind through pine, 2 heartbeats moving as one. Sometimes I'd glance back and find him watching me, steady, unblinking, afraid I'd disappear. And I understood. Fear of being left behind is the hardest wound to heal. I'd been carrying mine too ever since the day Laura was gone. I stopped turning on the TV. Didn't need the sound of strangers filling the silence. The only sound I wanted was Raven's breathing under the chair, the occasional whimper of a dream. I read to him at night, slow and low, the same way I once read to Laura. Sometimes he'd rest his chin on my knee, eyes closed, breath even. And I realized for the first time in years the house wasn't silent anymore. It had a heartbeat, a presence, a kind of love that didn't need words. Sarah visited one afternoon, carrying a bag of food and some supplies. She watched Raven dart around the yard, smiling. "He looks completely different now," she said. I followed her gaze and nodded. "So do I." Her eyes softened. "You found what you lost, didn't you?" I hesitated, then answered quietly, "No, Sarah. I found what I'd forgotten, a reason to wake up." After she left, I stood watching Raven stretched out on the grass, the sunlight lying across his fur like a warm blanket. I remembered him tied to that tree, swollen belly, lifeless eyes. I remembered that note, "Won't make it through the week." Then I looked at him now, alive, strong, free. That note was wrong. Completely wrong. I sat beside him, resting my hand over his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and sure. "You see, Raven," I murmured, "we both survived. But survival's just the beginning. Now we learn how to trust, how to love, how to start again." He lifted his head, pressing his nose against my palm, as if he understood. A dry mountain wind swept through the yard, carrying the scent of pine and sunburned grass. I looked up. The sky was a blue so deep it almost hurt to see. And in that moment I knew. We had crossed the border of loss and were learning slowly how to name happiness again. Autumn came to Flagstaff, wrapped in the kind of light that felt like memory. Soft, gold, dry wind pine needles falling in slow spirals around the porch. Every morning, Raven still ran across the yard, strong, graceful, every trace of death long gone. But then one morning, he did something that stopped my heart cold. I was cleaning out the small shed behind the house, old cardboard boxes, forgotten tools, the smell of damp wood mixed with dry dust. Behind me, Raven was rummaging through a dark corner, scratching lightly at something. When I turned, he was walking toward me, carrying a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper in his mouth. He set it at my feet, no bark, no wag, just stood there, eyes deep and still like the air before a storm. I bent down and picked it up. When the faded words caught the sunlight, my breath stopped. Won't make it through the week. That note, the death sentence someone had tied beneath the tree the day I found him. I remembered the way he trembled when I cut the rope, the sound of his ragged breathing, the smell of blood and dirt. I thought I'd buried it, all the paper, the memory locked away in a wooden box at the back of a drawer. Yet here it was in the new yard in the afternoon sun, brought to me by the very creature it condemned. I looked at him. Raven didn't look away. He just stood there, head slightly tilted, eyes calm and steady, as if to say, "It's time, isn't it?" I sat down on the porch step, the paper trembling in my hand. The dry wind brushed past, swirling a few yellow leaves around us. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Where'd you find this kid?" Raven stepped closer, placing one paw gently on my knee. I understood. No words were needed. I went inside, opened the old cabinet, and pulled out Laura's silver lighter, the one I'd carried all these years. The metal was scratched and dull, but when I flicked it, the flame came alive, small, steady golden. I stepped back onto the porch. The sun was sinking behind the mountains, spilling amber light across the yard. I set the paper down on the ground, pinning one corner with a small stone. Raven sat opposite me, silent, unblinking. "You know what we have to do, don't you?" I murmured. He lifted a paw, slowly resting it on the edge of the paper, then looked at me, steady, unafraid. I nodded. The flame touched the corner, a soft hiss, then fire spread quick and clean, a streak of orange cutting through gold. The crooked handwriting shrank ink, curling into black smoke until there was nothing left. "Won't make it through the week." 7 words once meant to define him, to end him. Now, just ash. When the last ember faded, I shielded it from the wind, holding the tiny mound until it turned to fine dust. A light breeze rose, lifting the ashes into the sunset, scattering them like flecks of gold. Raven watched, then stepped close, pressing his head against my chest. I rested my hand on his neck, feeling warmth seep through the fabric of my shirt. "It's over, kid," I whispered. "They don't get to name you anymore. No one does." For a long time I said nothing. Through the murmur of the pines, I heard something softer, the quiet exhale of pain, finally leaving my body. I hadn't just burned a piece of paper. I'd burned 3 years of guilt, loss, and loneliness, and the nights I'd spent asking why I was still alive when Laura wasn't. Beside me, Raven lifted his head, the last light of day catching in his eyes, clear, bright, reflecting the sky. In them, I saw myself. Not the man broken by the past, but one reborn beside this small, steadfast soul. I stood brushing the dust from my palms and drew in a long breath. The Arizona air was dry, but kind. It felt like my lungs were opening for the first time in years. I looked at Raven and smiled. "We did it, didn't we, buddy?" We made it through that week and every week after. Raven wagged his tail, rubbed his head against my leg, then bounded into the yard, barking, once clear, bright alive. I looked up at the crimson sky, the ashes dissolving in the wind, and I knew. We had closed the old chapter and begun a new life. Winter came slowly to Flagstaff. Not the kind of cold that bites, but the kind that makes you want another cup of coffee and a longer moment by the window. Out on the back lawn, Raven chased a dry leaf, his black legs gliding across gold grass, his body strong and certain, no trace left of the creature once abandoned in the forest. Every morning when I opened the door, he was already there waiting as if to make sure the world was still a good place. He'd look at me with that deep, calm gaze, then sprint across the yard barking twice. Not to call for me, but to say, "We're still here, Jack. Both of us are still alive." The house was different now. The kitchen is no longer silent. On the table sat a small ceramic bowl I kept just for him and the collar engraved "Raven, worth saving." Each afternoon, I sat on the porch with a book, and he lay beside my chair, head resting on my boots. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Our silences had become full of meaning, and I realized some conversations don't need words, only the quiet rhythm of peace. Yesterday, Sarah stopped by. She leaned against the fence, watching Raven stretch out in the sun, smiling softly. "I still don't understand how he made it," she said. I smiled back, maybe because he was never truly alone, and because I needed a reason to keep going. She was quiet for a long moment, then her eyes softened. "You know, Jack," she said gently, "I think you two saved each other." I nodded. "Yeah, I think we did." That night I sat beside the fireplace, flames painting gold on the walls. Raven slept curled up beside me, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. I reached down, brushing my fingers over his soft fur. I remembered the first time I saw him, those hollow eyes, the swollen belly, the rope digging into his flesh. And now, just months later, this same life was sleeping safely beside me in warmth and love. If that isn't a miracle, I don't know what is. I picked up a small notebook, Laura's old journal, and for the first time in years I wrote, "Miracles don't fall from the sky. They happen every time someone chooses to stay instead of walking away." Outside, the night wind carried the scent of pine and fresh snow, the faint hum of life continuing somewhere beyond the trees. I looked up, and the moon fractured into pieces of light across the thin frost. Raven, stirred, pressed his head into my hand. I smiled. "Yeah, I know. We'll go for a walk tomorrow, buddy." The next morning, we returned to the old trail, the place where it all began. The oak tree still stood rough and ancient moss crawling across its roots. I stopped there, inhaling deeply. Raven stood beside me, tail gently swaying, calm and quiet. No fear, no ghosts, only gratitude. I knelt, placed a dry pine branch at the base of the tree, a small marker for something good that once happened there. "This is where I found you," I whispered, "and where I found myself again." We turned back. The morning sun spilled through the trees, laying stripes of gold across Raven's back. He ran ahead, then stopped, turning toward me. The light caught his eyes, and in them I saw not just him, but myself, a man who had lost everything, now standing in the grace of having found reason again. I used to think life had only one miracle survival. Now I know there's a greater one, being given a second chance to love and to be loved. If you're hearing my story, I want you to remember this. Every time you choose to save a life, no matter how small or broken, you're also saving your own heart. Because every act of kindness is proof that no matter how dark the world becomes, there's still room for light. And if the story of Raven and me has reached you, please don't let it end here. Share it. Tell it. Reach out to whatever soul still waits for a hand. Because sometimes when you save a life, you're the one being saved in ways you never expected.